Welcome to my second channel, Psychonautica, where I have long-form discussions with fascinating people on the subject of psychedelics. My name is Rob, and today I'm talking with filmmaker Richard Stanley, who has had a long career making documentaries and Hollywood movies, including the 90s cyberpunk cult classic Hardware, and more recently, the Lovecraftian horror The Colour Out of Space starring Nicolas Cage. Aside from his big movie projects, Richard has had an interest in the occult, mysticism, altered states, and of course one of the possible gateways to those altered states, which is psychedelics. And in this conversation, he talks about his encounters with all these things in what sounds like one of the most extraordinary lives a human being has ever lived. We talk about voodoo cults, the experience of taking LSD in the middle of a war zone, and the possibility that doing so might have actually saved his life. We talk about some of the symbolism within his film work and how during his most recent movie he tried to make the watcher feel like they were on a DMT trip. And honestly, I think he succeeded because that film is bonkers and I absolutely got that kind of whoa feeling from watching it. And I'm not just saying this, it was an absolute honour to get to talk to Richard as I am a huge fan of his work, and as you'll see, he's such a grounded, friendly and all-round awesome person with one of the most fascinating life stories I've ever heard. It was such a fun conversation, so without further ado, I bring you Richard Stanley. Enjoy. Maybe a good place to start is, just in your own words, maybe just introduce yourself.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. I mean, I am Richard Stanley, I believe.
Well, we can get into that later on, Richard. You know, there's a lot, a lot of different perspectives we can take on that one.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, it's open to debate, but at this point in time, I'm reasonably convinced I am Richard Stanley. I'm connecting with you from my home in the French Pyrenees in the mountains of Occitania.
Excellent.
There's not a lot going on. It's the second last day of the year. It's dark out there and quiet, and I think it's a good time for a chat.
Well, it is, yeah, and especially with it being this sort of time of year. I think hopefully this will play into the conversation. It is kind of one of these times where it's seen as like a transformative time, and it's a time when sort of people change themselves and sort of take on sort of make new promises to a new tomorrow. And that sort of ties in. I've made myself a whole bunch of notes of different topics we can go down, but I'll just read some of them out to you just to sort of prep the audience for where we might go with some of this. So I've just written as a kind of bullet points: psychedelics, mysticism, witchcraft, lycanthropy, paganism, what is reality, spirituality, transformation of being, and experience of the esoteric. So does that sound okay?
Wow, okay, yeah, that promises a vertiginous hour and a half.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess how I am aware of you, Richard, is through your work in film. So, again, not to sort of put two words into your own, but I mean, would you sort of describe yourself as a director? Is that like how you encapsulate your main sort of like pastime or career?
Yeah, I guess I would call myself a filmmaker. And if we want to really bore into that, then I'm a writer, director, hyphenate mostly these days because I'm not really shooting my own stuff anymore, generally working with a DP. But ever since I was old enough to get a sense of the process, I've been, for some macabre reason, attempting to make movies and moving images and disseminate them to the unwary members of the public. So I guess, filmmaker will do as a tag. I studied anthropology at the very beginning of the trail and did initially have a sense I might want to pursue a career as an academic. But war and political circumstances kind of got in the way of that. And in the end, being a filmmaker or a documentarist, pretty much was the best ticket I could print for myself to be able to get to some of the places and see some of the things that I wanted to see.
Well, I think, and if, from what I gather, or certainly, what I've read about your life, in terms of seeing some of the places you want to see, you've had what sounds like an absolutely extraordinary life and some extraordinary experiences. And I think in terms of, by the time you made the film, which where I first became aware of you, which was Hardware, which is one of the sort of like defining cult films of my generation. And just to give you a bit of backstory, I was part of the sort of like Generation X, sort of cyberpunky goth kids sort of thing. So Hardware sort of really landed. It was, with the soundtrack, and with things like Ministry and stuff like that. It was one of the sort of our regular sort of viewing films. But by that point, when I was sort of like dancing around in nightclubs, that sort of stuff, you already had this fairly extraordinary life of heading out to Afghanistan and sort of having these very like what I could only describe as sounds like extraordinary experiences. And I think that's one of the first threads I'd like to sort of pull on there, because I'm talking here just for the benefit of the audience. You made a documentary which was called The Voice of the Moon. Is that correct?
That's the one, yeah.
Yeah. And if my understanding is right, the intention is you went out to Afghanistan to sort of because you were looking to investigate lycanthropy. Is that, or can you expand?
That's one small aspect of it, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, really, I was interested in the primordial traditions and shamanism, and there was a spirit transformation dance, which we understood was still being performed in Chitral in the high mountains of Pakistan, in the Kashkund Mountains, and in the Hindu Kush, which was something called the Dance of the Animals, where hunters were possessed by the spirits of the animals they hunted. I was really keen to actually see this as part of the Indo-Aryan tradition. It sounded so out of order, and I so would like to have actually experienced that. I never actually got to see it in real life, but these stories of essentially authentic shamanic experiences, because Afghanistan was largely pagan until 1910. Islam arrived in the Hindu Kush in 1910. Kafiristan is called Kafiristan because it's the land of the Kafir, because it was the last place on the map to get with the one God. And here in Europe, the old religion was genocidally wiped out a long time ago. We've had about 2,000 years of Christianity, whereas 1910 seemed so recent and so fresh that I figured that there's got to be elements of those traditions still present in the among the current tribal people, barely assimilated into Islam, and the chance of finding things which really connected back to prehistory was still very, very beguiling. Then, beyond that, I guess I was drawn into Afghanistan. If there was one thing that drew me above all else, it was the fact that there were still blank spots on the map at that point in time. We had the best available map of the mountains, which was courtesy of a U.S. airbase in Missouri. There were still blank spots on the in the contours, which read relief data incomplete, which meant that essentially we didn't yet really know what was going on in there. And thanks to war and geopolitical circumstance, outsiders just hadn't penetrated into some areas of the mountain. And the temptation to get in there, and given the number of mythological sources like I guess Gurdjieff and people talk about Sufic initiatory centers in the Hindu Kush, and there's these constant stories of Shambhala and lost valleys that I guess that reeled me in. And along with that, there were also the recurrent stories of villages in the mountains where the people weren't really people, but were wolves wearing human skin, which put the hook in me. And that's also partly down to the fact that dogs are unclean in a haram in Islam. So tribal people have a habit of condemning the people living in the next valley as
Hmm.
being dogs or wolves, because it's just a kind of a standard insult in Afghanistan. So this issue of different people accusing each other of not being human or being furry on the inside was something that, yeah, I ran into quite a bit.
Interesting, because it's you say with a lot of like shamanism and stuff like that. Normally, there's a sort of a degree of animalism in that. You know, this kind of this transforming, whether spiritually or you know, or what they believe it's like physically happening. So it's kind of interesting that the sort of the animal, like you say, the furry on the inside is then seen as an insult, whereas often that's seen as like a goal of some of these traditions is to transform. So with the lycanthropy part of it, they were seen as they were like the outcasts then in that particular tradition.
Yeah, I mean that would have been again since the coming of Islam, which
Mm.
demonizes paganism in the same way that Catholicism treated yeah, witchcraft and pagan impulses here in Europe. So it's werewolves were like fauns or mythological creatures inevitably ended up becoming demonized. I mean, I think they had a goat god as well in Afghanistan before 1910, which, like, yeah,
That was
in
never
the
going to go
West,
down well.
like Pan or Jack of the Green, they all ended up
Yeah.
being becoming larger than life symbols of evil, when in fact they were symbols of, yeah, fecundity and the life of the land originally, and that, yeah, goats are a super essential part of the diet and everything that goes on in Afghanistan. But
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, and dogs, I guess, just got bum wrapped because of it's some brief mention in the hadiths, I think, that the prophet sees somebody yeah, petting a dog, and the dog licks his hand, and then the prophet says, "Now you have to wash your hands before you go to the mosque and pray." And from this notion that dogs are somehow unclean seems to have been yeah, exaggerated to quite a strong degree. There
So
are other hadiths which recommend being kind to dogs. There's even implications that you might not make it into paradise as fast if you're mean to them, but people seem to ignore that. And generally, everyone is very yeah, quick to call the next guy a dog.
yeah.
Which,
Well, I mean, there's a lot worse things going on within some of these religious texts than just mistreatment of dogs. So I mean, yeah, it's
yeah,
some
and it runs all the way. It's I guess it was that was a key turning point for me in some way, because somewhere in the middle of the whole experience, I was trying very hard to understand my hosts, and at the time, so I did my business, and I was going to the mosque and reading the Quran and the hadiths, and I recall I was sitting in an alfalfa field one morning, reading my scripture and watching this beautiful dawn taking place over the field, and a dog had given birth in the irrigation ditch next to me during the night, and I saw these puppies come wandering out into the field who were newly born and trying to open their eyes and perceive where they were. And I guess I had a sort of hippy dippy moment of grace, or yeah, oneness with the world, and simultaneously the mullah, the main sort of holy man in the village, was just coming back from morning prayer at the mosque and was walking up the path with his prayer mat under his arm, and sort of grumbling to himself, typical long white beard. And
Mhm.
as he went past, he casually kicked one of the puppies out of the way and went on up the path, kind of grumbling to himself. And I think it was an act as simple as that, which fairly early on in the process alienated me from my jihadi hosts and made me think, okay, well, I don't know, but I'm not really with you guys. It's
So
so
with the shamanism that you were there, had gone there to witness. So you mentioned you didn't actually end up being able to see any of this kind of ceremonies take place, or
No, I
take
was
part
never
in it.
able to witness the dance of the animals. That remained a something that people talked about in hushed voices, and I picked up some nice bits of folklore, and but never actually saw that with my own eyes. I didn't really get to deal with possessed people until a bunch of years later when I went to Haiti and got involved with the voodoo. But I would dearly love to have actually seen something like that coming out of the Eurasian tradition for coming out of this continent.
Hmm.
It certainly seems to me that there's people in the Hindu Kush who came down from up north hundreds or thousands of years ago, and at the time of even of Genghis Khan and people, a lot of yeah. Asian traditions seems to have found their way down and become time locked in the Hindu Kush. But I love the
Mm.
fact that when in the mountains, time travels so slowly, and in a subliterate society, when people can concertina time, so that everyone kind of in Afghanistan in the villages seems to remember roughly that World War II happened and Hitler happened, and somewhere before Hitler was the Raj, and they remember beating the British, and somewhere before the Raj is Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great, but it's all kind of concertinaed together, so those events might almost have been happening in their great great granddad's time.
Yeah. And
It
is it
still
just kind
feels
of
very
oral
fresh.
tradition at that point, or is it kind of how are they referencing it? Is it just something they've heard, or so is it?
Chinggis and Genghis Khan, Chinggis and Iskander, Alexander the Great are still everyone still remembers them.
Mhm.
Oh, and so yeah, some of the old stuff feels like it was just the other day, and which I really like, and obviously the other attraction the whole area held for me is that it's never been electrified. There's there's almost no roads, no written language, and each time you go in a layer, another valley, the dialect changes a little.
Mm.
People from one river valley to another don't quite understand each other and generally don't interbreed with the people next door. And usually all marriages are arranged to their cousins at one end of the valley or another. And the further you go into it, the further back in time you go. So there was a sense that we were able to touch a lifestyle that hadn't really changed for a couple of thousand years. Deep in there, the world is lit only by fire. People still hunt with falcons. People carry swords. There's no roads, no motorized transport. So the only intrusions from the 21st century now that you're seeing are occasional cell phones and yeah, sat nav and modern military weapons, which have fallen in there for various reasons.
Yeah.
The Enfield rifles have been upgraded to fully automatic weapons and things, but otherwise the basic fabric of the world is still pretty much the same as in year zero, the time of Christ or somewhere like that, which appealed to me tremendously.
Yeah, I can imagine. We talk about it being like a time capsule. I think it's even more than that. It sounds like it's like a time capsule that sort of pulls you into it, because I think you just mentioned already not having electricity, so you have to then compensate for that. And I believe you did a lot of your filming on like hand crank cameras and stuff like that. And I kind of
Yeah,
wonder now
the whole of Voice of the Moon is hand cranked. We were forced to use kind of
but
early
it
news
gave it such a
technique.
distinctive look, and then it's such a it's kind of adds really to the kind of the atmosphere of the film. It almost seems like it was like a deliberate choice rather than just out of pure necessity.
Yeah, and it
So.
was really the only way it could be shot because Afghanistan's been misrepresented by the media simply because all electronic news gathering equipment has to be recharged after half an hour or an
Mhm.
hour, which means you can never go that far away from electricity. Even if you're out in the field, eventually you need, after half an hour or an hour, you need to plug your camera into the car cigarette lighter, which is how most news crews do it, and
Yeah.
charge it off their Jeep or their car. But when you're away from the road and you go a day away from the road, you've got no chance. So, given that the paucity of roads in the country, and the fact that most of the country is thousands of miles of river valleys in between mountains and forest, it means we very seldom get to see any of that. I doubt that anyone ever actually gets as far as noticing that there's cedar forests in Afghanistan and a lot of different terrain in there that just never shows up because we're always used to shooting in basically at the side of the road in the flattest, dustiest parts of the country. So
So do,
the temptation to get fully off road and to worm our way back into the mountains is very strong.
yeah. So in regards to the kind of the shamanism you're there to witness, is there some sort of sacrament that they would take, or that you had heard? Was there some sort of, were you investigating some sort of like substance that they were taking in order to invoke these trance states, or were you just going into it completely blind, just purely based off that there was some kind of tradition there?
I was going into it pretty blind, but I don't think that those kind of spirit possession dances rely on entheogens as such. I would imagine it would have been similar to what was happening in Haiti, what I was observing in the voodoo, because certainly within voodoo, Santeria, Candomblé, and pretty much all of the dance ecstatic faiths from the South American, Latin, Afro-Caribbean culture. It's no one is actually reliant on the alcohol or the drugs. You do see joints going around, rum and strong alcohols used as offerings to the spirits, but the possession state itself, I think, is coming from a completely different route. I've seen people now getting possessed, not only when there's no party ambience and no rum flying around, but also when there's no drumming. Like at Sordor, the waterfall where everyone makes pilgrimage to in Haiti once a year. Simply getting to the place and touching the water is enough for people to go into a trance state. So I think it's I don't think that it's drug based, and in a lot of these cultures in Haiti, for instance, there was a natural psychedelic flying around, which was some kind of psychedelic drink called cloche. But it
Right.
was only the delinquents and kind of the bad kids who were drinking cloche. The voodoo people kind of frowned on it.
And what do you know what the substance was in cloche, or what it was made out
I
of?
don't know. It comes from bell. The Creole word for bell. It was some kind of local fruit,
Hmm.
which was fermented into a psychedelic drink, but it wasn't being used as part of the magical work or the voodoo tradition. It was simply something that
Just getting
the
fucked
kids were
up.
getting. Yeah.
But
So yeah,
with the voodoo
yeah.
tradition, though, because I've heard sort of different thoughts there. That there's some people who think that is based around some kind of substance. That I
Yeah, I
think
think
I've
that's
heard.
shortchanging them. It's not as simple as that.
Could
It's,
you expand on what is it that from your experience, what is it that's going on there?
well, from my experience of it, it seems that us outsiders tend to underestimate voodoo, from the point of view that everyone's always insisting there must be acting, or maybe
Mm.
they're on drugs, or they're they're drunk. But from being around it, it's pretty clear that that the possession state is a complete change of consciousness in the people around you. When someone gets possessed, you can tell that something has changed in their brainwaves. And I don't doubt that if you were able to do an EEG or a CAT scan or something of someone in a possessed state, you would probably see a physiological trace of that change. It's as clear as an epileptic seizure.
Hmm.
You can see that something that they're not acting, and that some kind of altered state has kicked in. But it's something which is accessed through ritual, through the repetition of those rituals, and through I guess the cultural archetypes, the expectations of that culture. If you're raised in a culture where it's normal to get possessed, it's that much easier for you.
Yeah, sure.
Same as in Afghanistan, I saw a lot of folk being healed in ridiculous ways, and magical actions happen which just wouldn't work in the West. But if you're raised in a tribal culture where those things do work, and you believe it, they seem to have currency. I mean, I was seeing Haitian kids getting possessed who are maybe 5 or 6 years old, really young. So I think it's something that comes in some ways with the society you're being brought up in. It's also possible. No one's done any work on this, so I'm purely talking through my hat. But it's possible there may be a genetic dispensation for it, given the low population mobility in Haiti. In some of these places, it seems to turn up in places where there's not a lot of through traffic. It's incredibly hard to get off the island if you're born Haitian and to emigrate anywhere else. And most people are trapped there all of their lives. And I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't discover there was a gene for voodoo eventually. Just like there seems to be a triggered gene for so many other things, but trying to find physiological traces for it, I don't think anyone's gone down that route. I would love to see what people's brainwaves are doing, because it's also clear that an experienced Hungan, a voodoo sorcerer, can take a possessed person and bring them back down again as well. I've seen that a bunch of times when people have been possessed and have been totally freaking out. The Hungan gets up and spins them around 2-3 times and says some words and stuff, and the person comes back down again. If we knew how that worked, it would be just so much better than giving people Thorazine or in terms of bringing people out of a hysterical crisis or out of a potentially dangerous state. They do seem to be able to affect the I guess the brainwaves of the voodoo practitioners. It's almost like a controlled state of epilepsy.
Yeah, I mean, I can certainly relate to that. I mean, I've spent some time in South America on exploring sort of ayahuasca shamanism, and they have similar kind of techniques there for bringing you down if you're too deep in the mariachion, as they call it, the sort of like the trance state of the ayahuasca. Then the shamans will come over and like blow smoke on you on the crown of your head and sort of like kind of blow things out of you. And now, even as a Western person who was extremely skeptical of all this stuff, I went into it really as a kind of like a curiosity I wanted to explore what this was about, but I wasn't really taking any of it seriously. But then, having been in these states and then where it's I was having like life transforming experiences and not knowing which way was up and down, and then being guided through the experience and having them do these kind of simple rituals. Whatever I thought, it worked. I mean, it just worked. So I kind of soon had to like readjust my skepticism to fit into the experiences that I was seeing and that had happened to me. And I've got no idea of what the mechanism of these things are, but I'm certainly a lot more open to it. So with what you just described, where I think it could just be a cultural element, a kind of a cultural programming or it could be, as you mentioned, like a genetic element. But whatever it is, it's there and it works for those people. And I think human beings are kind of, our operating system is flexible enough that I think people can go into other cultures and sort of, have like a mini download of that culture and then take part in those rituals, and it seems to work pretty well. So, yeah, I would fully believe that those people are in Haiti are experiencing what they say they're experiencing. I think and I'm aware a lot of people just sort of write it off and say, oh, they're just play acting, it's just performance, it's just bullshit. But then, there are other parallels to this. We see, Native Americans doing things like sun dances and, in Central America, where things like sweat lodges, which can be very like spiritual experiences, but it's basically just people sweating in a tent. So I think there are lots of ways to get into these altered states. I don't think it necessarily just needs to be, psychedelics, but I think because whatever's happening, whichever route is being taken, whether it's a psychedelic route or some sort of endurance route or some sort of cultural route, then it's still, our sort of brain wetware that's generating the experience. So yeah, whatever the sort of the lock is that's turning the key that's turning the lock, then we are capable of having that experience. So I would totally believe that, and I think it'd be fascinating to see that. So
it comes down to how to trigger or induce the experience, I guess, and how to control it.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned epilepsy before. I mean, I actually have epilepsy, and yeah, it's a very strange, not very pleasant experience, but it is an altered state when you go into it. So even just this, which I think even the most skeptical person would say that epilepsy is it's not unnatural. It happens. You have people who have epilepsy. Therefore, there is there could be there is a way that our brains can trigger into these kind of states. And there's lots of reports of people who've had epilepsy talking about having really ecstatic states prior to seizures or spiritual experiences. I've never had that myself personally, but I would certainly say it's a very weird experience. Not one I would enter into willingly. But yeah, I mean, it just shows that these things can occur naturally, and there's certainly enough reports of people having just spontaneous spiritual experiences or near-death experiences. And some of the descriptions of these things certainly align with experiences I've had on psychedelics. So I think things like DMT experiences and 5-MeO DMT experiences are very similar to what some people describe as near-death experiences. So I don't see there's any real controversy that we are capable of having these things. And yeah, I would love to see those types of really kind of like, I guess what we could say, like kind of fringe, or lesser known shamanism explored more to find out what's going on there. How long was it you were out in Haiti for?
Yeah. Oh, sorry, how long was I there for?
Yeah.
Not long enough. I was only there about 3 months. So, not nearly long enough. I figured if I'd stayed any longer, I probably would have died because it was.
Well, this is another feature of you, Richard. You do seem to get into a few scrapes where I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing perhaps some of these kind of stories. Particularly, I understand that there was one that you had around with your time in Afghanistan, which I think nicely ties in with this kind of psychedelic theme of the channel. Because maybe you want to if fill in the blanks there of your LSD experience in Afghanistan.
Yeah, and this is a fairly notorious incident, and it's notorious because I'm forced to admit that LSD saved my life. That I do think that I would be dead if I hadn't been tripping at that point in time. And I often use this as a rebuttal to people's arguments against psychedelic experimentation, because yes, people can do stupid things under the influence of acid, and it does mess up a lot of people who take it. But at the same time, I can't deny the fact that I owe my life to it as a drug, which was just a set of bizarre circumstances. But before we left England, some friends of mine who were involved in psychedelic experimentation gave us a sheet of blotter acid with the intention that if we ever did make it to Shambhala or ended up sitting on at least on the head of the giant Buddha statue, which still existed back then in Bamiyan Valley, that we should take some really good top-notch lab strength LSD with us.
Those are good friends, Richard. You had some good friends.
It was a nice thought, and we put it in the medical kit with the rest of the the quinine, the morphine, etc., and forgot about it. And then when we were initially in the country, I was working under the misapprehension that the war was such a serious business, and the situation we're in was so serious that it was a lousy time to be doing drugs, and we ought to be clean and sober. And take it neat, which of course is super foolish because it's kind of war demands the opposite.
Go
Uh,
Gonzo.
but we tried to be unusually focused and keep to the straight and narrow during during most of the journey, and then really this only happened when in the latter part when things had gone terribly sideways, and basically it was the end of the first day of the attack on the provincial capital of Jalalabad. A situation had happened where the resistance had decided that they needed to install a tribal government in a recognized capital city. It was the only way that they could get UN recognition at that point in time. So the United Nations' attitude basically precipitated a situation where there was a mass attack on the provincial capitals, Jalalabad, and in the course of it, we got pasted. It turned out real bad. And by the end of day one, myself and the German cameraman Immo Horn were hit by some kind of missile. I don't know what, but I remember what it sounded like, and we were both blown up. It was just after dark, and I had a sort of Pulp Fiction moment in that I was blown through the air, landed, and was completely unscathed and unharmed in any way, which afterwards seemed suspicious, and which often caused me to question the whole event. But nonetheless, yeah, we got blown up, whereas my friend Immo was hit by shrapnel, and quite a large number of tiny pieces of the bomb or whatever it was hit us, went through his body and went through his legs, and I got up and found I was okay, and he was down on the ground, couldn't move, and the first thing I did was I went for the medical kit and had to apply a field dressing to make certain it didn't bleed out. We were we were quite a long way from even our own lines, and the situation was quite dug in, like World War One at that point. So our first inclination was how the hell to get back to our own trench and get back to our own line. And as he was peppered with shrapnel, I couldn't walk. I was sitting cowering, basically ducking incoming, and everyone I knew at that point was dead or injured. And when you're the last one standing, you have this inclination that whatever's going to happen is going to happen to you next. Having applied the dressing, I was sitting there with the medical kit. At this point, the page of blutter acid turned up. Not knowing what else to do, I started eating it.
How much do you think you ate?
I was expecting that I was going to be killed at any moment, and I thought I might as well, die tripping. So it was. I didn't really have any other plan. Of course, after about half an hour, everything became intensely beautiful. um, the circumstance was was rapidly transformed, and my initial fear of the fireworks wore off, and it seemed to me that it was like a great big insane party that was going on, and I could feel the bass of the artillery coming up through my feet and in my diaphragm, and there was this constant strobe flicker going on from from the battle, and at the same time. Something else that had been happening at that point was the resistance had just been issued with these stingers, these ground-to-air rockets, which there's a silly Tom Hanks movie about this, Charlie Wilson's War. But we had these silly stingers, which were meant to knock down the Russian jet fighters. But the Russians were already wise to this, so they had responded to the stingers. So every time they overflew, they were dropping parachute flares, and the parachute flares distracted the heat-seeking the heat-seeking rockets. So the whole sky was full of these parachute flares, and which to my eyes seemed like all the stars were intensely bright. And because they were all on parachutes, they were kind of coming very slowly down from the heavens, which gave me the uncanny feeling that I was rising up towards the stars. It felt like the stars were bright and the whole earth was kind of drifting up towards them, and along with this strobe flicker effect that was going on, and the big orange balls from the incendiary stuff. It was it became intensely beautiful.
I think I understand a lot more now about the imagery that you used in The Color Out of Space and where you may have drawn from the. But sorry, please don't let me interrupt your story, like, because this is just as one of the most extraordinary events.
We got out of there. Which I don't think I would have done if I'd been taking it neat. If I'd been fully sober, I think I would have frozen in a state of panic and probably died there. But instead, I was able to find a guy in a donkey. I was able to get Mr. Horn on the back of the donkey, and took off. And I also had a foolish sense along the way that I could see or sense where there were booby traps or landmines. So, I had such a crazy sense of trippy conviction about it that I moved quite fast and didn't really think about it, and just went, okay, not going there, and took this zigzag course back towards the mountains, which managed to clear the city and make it back to the all the way back to the foothills of the Hindu Kush by dawn, which I don't think I would have achieved if it hadn't been for that sheet of blood or acid. It did a number of things. Obviously, it helps your night sights because it opens up your pupils so you can see a lot better in the dark, and that's whatever it's cut with usually gives us a slight speedy edge, so it gives you a teeny little extra energy boost, which also I think helped under the circumstances.
My God, I mean that. Yeah, it is possibly one of the most incredible stories of tripping, and I think I've ever heard, and I think there's something.
No, I mean, just on that note, I think it's relatively common. I mean, after that,
really?
I understood for the first time in my life why Lance, the surfer character, is still alive at the end of Apocalypse Now.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back to like the Vietnam War and things, I think a lot of folk probably figured out that their survival chances were better if they were tripping than if they were neat. And I had a friend working in the nightclub business in Hong Kong, who at one point got into a fight with a rival nightclub, and before their folk went out to chop up the other people with machetes and whatever they handed out what they called fighting drugs. Right. When he took the fighting drugs, he was surprised to find it was basically LSD. I think some folk have figured this out. And then a lot of conflicts these days, I think, are still fought between people who are all essentially self-medicating on different stimulants and different stuff, which is going to give them a very slight edge.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's. I think there's really, I mean, possibly out of the people listening to this, there's probably different camps forming, in the story, because there's certainly some people, and I think with what I've seen about a lot of how psychedelics are trying to be introduced into the mainstream is around the kind of like the therapeutic model. Like, if you go and sit in a sort of a sort of a clinical setting and you listen to like whale song and you're on a nice couch and then you take psychedelics because you are vulnerable, And this is almost the complete opposite of what you're describing, and certainly what I've experienced myself in these kind of shamanic settings where it's kind of more of, no, you take these things to empower yourself and to sort of, it's, and even if something bad does happen, or what might be perceived as bad in the everyday world, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So a bad experience, that there is still something of value there in what might be a difficult or challenging experience. And I think from what you describe, to be in that extreme a situation, possibly the most extreme situation, the feeling you're about to die. I mean, there's no greater ego death than that, I think, and then to sort of willingly say, well, I will take this on my terms and dive into that experience. I mean, just out of interest, how much of this acid did you eat, or was there no quantifying it by that point?
I took about 8 tabs or so. Not huge. I still had some left because after that I had it down, and I think I ate the rest of it in the course of the amount of time it took me to get from the edge of the Hindu Kush to finally get out of the country. But at that point I realized that I was better off tripping or being stoned than trying to take it neat. And I also noticed that all of the folk who were the cagiest about drugs and who were the most uptight about not accepting joints from the other jihadis and things, generally had all gotten killed or had gotten wiped out by that stage of the conflict. So I think it softened my stance. I realized I'd been getting it wrong when I first arrived.
I mean, it's interesting to hear you describe how the scene changed, and again, what would be typically something that would be horrifying people, these flares going off, and all this gunfire suddenly became this scene which you could, I don't know if you take in the beauty, or at least take in the experience, and not have it sort of be something that just completely makes you just quake in your boots. I mean, that's just a fascinating response to that, and especially when you put it in the context of that this experience probably saved your life. Then, I mean, it's
I think for better or worse, it kept us moving. It stopped me from freezing and simply trying to bury myself in the ground, which would have been the normal logical response to it.
Well, I think it's something to do with this. I would say, like, psychedelics, I think, are kind of like opening this font of certainly creativity, but just very novel thoughts. And I guess that's what you kind of need in that experience. You're in experience where everything that has been taught to you is that you are completely fucked. You may as well just just stay in the corner and just prepare to die. But then suddenly you're having this explosion of novelty and creative, where you're talking about like being able to spot booby traps. Whether that's true or not, it got you moving forward, and you thought, okay, well, I'm not going to freeze here because I know where the booby traps are, and so I know that if I'll take this pattern, I can go forwards. And maybe there were booby traps and maybe there weren't, but it kept you going forwards. And I think that's it's part of this just flood of unorthodox thinking that's just going on, that it's just like you say, maybe that was what saved your life in that situation. That's absolutely bonkers.
And there was a biblical moment as well. It was all pretty biblical. And on the way out, I had a sort of Lot's wife moment where I got to look back and see the city burning, and a big chunk of the place was on fire, and there was enough smoke coming off it that it seemed to fill about even in the day about a third part of the heavens, and the refugees streaming out of the place and fleeing past us into the wasteland were all dressed for the occasion, basically on camels pulling donkeys. The look of it was not very different from year zero or something biblical. And I think the sight of the apocalyptic destruction going on behind us
Hmm.
also spurred me on towards the mountains. I had the sense that if we didn't keep moving, it would be turned to a pillar of salt or something.
Okay, well, I can only imagine what that would have looked. I mean, it must have been like sort of look like revelation or something. You've got the sky lighting up in absolutely insane colors, the ground shaking. These, yeah, sort of, you know, people who, as mentioned, of this time capsule era running around. It's just, and you there with a head full of acid, so thinking all sorts of like 4-dimensional directions. What a just yeah.
Yeah, and I guess another thing that helped there on in is that at that stage, from there on to the point when I eventually made it back to the outside world and to Peshawar in Pakistan, and which was yeah, quite a ways away. I didn't come across anyone else who spoke English, or to whom I was able to in any ways communicate. And I'd also everyone who was protecting me, my original hosts, had been killed or dispersed, so we're on our own in a hostile country where full of different tribal people and different factions. Uh, the only way not to get killed is to look like you're not a threat.
Mm.
I guess if you're relaxed and fully goofy and obviously insane, people are less likely to kill you on sight. But if you can make people laugh, then all the better. So I guess yeah, there was a point when I realized that the only way we were going to escape was if we were fully relaxed.
Yeah, I mean, just when you mentioned with all the kind of like the religious aspect of it, is that something were you kind of religious prior to that? The only reason I ask is that I noticed that, I mean, there's a lot of religious imagery that's come up in your work, and I'm just wondering, is that affected by that experience, or was that something that was kind of there beforehand? Just to throw in a few examples for the audience, there's a lot of religious iconography and hardware, certainly in some in the island of Dr. Moreau, and is this something of your own background, or is this from your influences, or just something that you're interested in?
I guess it's always been a problem. I was yeah, born in South Africa, and spent the first 16 years of my life in apartheid era South Africa,
Mm.
which was largely controlled by the Dutch Reformed Church, and who were extremely conservative. And the way that impacted on my life as a child, before I'd really developed any kind of social awareness or political conscience, was that it kept intruding into my world by banning the things they thought were satanic. So they had a very fixed notion of what they thought was evil. And while I was growing up, I was fully aware that heavy metal comic book was criminalized in South Africa.
Mm.
The Exorcist was banned, and you could go to jail for watching The Exorcist.
Really?
The Omen movies ran into trouble, and yeah, the Rocky Horror Picture Show was banned, etc. So there was like, it's true. People went to jail for watching Rocky Horror Picture Show, and groups of people got together to watch Rocky Horror in secret. There were secret Rocky Horror Picture Show parties where somebody had a VHS, an illegal VHS of the banned movie,
Oh my
and
god.
it was absolutely crazy. But that totally happened. So long before I saw the broader sort of socio-political, geopolitical picture, there was an issue of religious censorship, an issue of I guess an enforced notion of what was good and evil, and that ran into my mom was an anthropologist, and my interests were mostly in tribal witchcraft, magic, mythology. creation myths, things which were also widely seen as as evil, and by the missionary culture, which was seeking at every turn to demonize traditional beliefs. So I guess issues of religion were started to impact on me from fairly young, as I realized that suddenly I couldn't buy the comic book I wanted because it had been banned by the Dutch Reformed Church. It raised raised different questions. Also, the South Africans had their own tranche of millennialist apocalyptic beliefs. They also seem to tend towards the belief that we're living in the end times of tribulation. There's a strong influence from the Adventists and from the Jehovah's Witnesses and the witnesses in this general sensation that we're heading towards some kind of apocalyptic future, that the Antichrist is going to come along, and there'll be wars, rumors of wars, famines, plagues of locusts, and what have you. So I guess I was inculcated into a lot of that iconography even as a child.
So this is a ridiculously broad question, but what is it that you sort of think is, for want of a better term, going on in terms of our kind of like human experience? So having had these experiences that you've had, and having experienced these psychedelic states, and having experienced the extremes of human nature, and these zombie possessions and all these different things, then are you someone who sort of kind of believes or in like something beyond the veil, something beyond this kind of like this human experience that we're having? Or just how would you, I don't know if you'd like put into a radio friendly soundbite, what's your sort of thoughts about what's going on with this bizarre human experience?
Well, I have to say I still have no idea what's going on. I couldn't possibly say that one theory has triumphed over another in terms of my ongoing debate as to what the F is actually happening.
But something's happening.
I mean, Elon Musk is a proponent of simulation theory. And if he actually believes that, then it does seem to be working for him. As a life plan or game plan, he seems to be doing pretty good at it. And if we are living inside a simulation, then that would cover a lot of bases, and explain a lot of the off the wall synchronicity and the dense weave of fractal coincidences that make life seem not particularly random a lot of the time. And the sense that we're in a sandbox video game, or that we may be, our lives may somehow be entertainment, is difficult to fully escape. But I do believe that there are ultra-dimensional forces which act upon our consciousness and on our experience here. I don't think that all of those forces are a product of my own imagination, that I'm fully projecting onto it. I think there is a factor X, some other organizing principle or intelligence at work. I don't know if I could go as far as to say that's the presence of a deity, but I can't fully explain away some of the things that have happened, and some of the things that I've seen as being simply the products of my own consciousness.
Yeah, I think your answer there is possibly the most honest answer that somebody can give, because I think the person who says that they know what the fuck is going on is the person you can quickly spot someone who's completely full of shit. So yeah, I mean, I would totally agree, and I'm similarly. There's so many experiences which have all seemed so true to me, and then all seemed sort of complete bullshit at the same time, that it's kind of impossible to see it as anything else other than just some experience that is just to be experienced, and that's all there is to it. It's kind of interesting. You mentioned sort of Elon Musk and the technology aspect, because this is something that's it certainly kind of cropped up in a few of my psychedelic experiences. This idea of these altered states as a form of technology, whether it's sort of, like experiential technology or spiritual technology. And, often one of the things that go in this, and I don't know if you've got any experience with DMT, but that sort of, for a lot of people, that has a very technological aspect to it, where a lot of people do feel like it suddenly breaks through the simulation, and they become aware of the operating system that's going on there. And I certainly think that out of all my experiences, that does have this very sci-fi feel to it. I don't know if have you had any experience with that particular substance?
Yeah, I've managed to have three pretty ass-kicking DMT trips. No, I'd like to do more, but I'm glad I had the three that I had.
And were they sort of, did they have that kind of like sci-fi characteristic that is kind of notable in that, or was it kind of more? Because some people report it being very organic and sort of that it's more or less like any other psychedelic, whereas a lot of people report it having this much more hyperspacey technological element to it. And yeah, I just wonder if you could maybe expand upon your own experiences with that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess mine. I wouldn't have classified mine as being coming into the sci-fi genre so much. I guess being who I am, they were tempered by I guess apocalyptic imagery and pagan shamanic material and outright Lovecraftian stuff, which I just only managed to have three trips because of limited access to the actual materials. The first time I tried it, it was with a friend, Donald Ruan, who basically turned me on to the idea and gave me what he considered to be the right dose, and I did it in a back garden in North London, and really my first impression was that I died. It simply felt like oh shit, I'm dead. I fell over backwards. My consciousness exited my this reality. It felt like someone had turned a kaleidoscope and everything had just shattered or disintegrated, and it felt like on the near side of it, on the other side of it, was some kind of layer of hell world, or some kind of layer of energies or souls that were still connected to the material world, that were still connected to the earth, like Lord Dunsany's heavy side layer or something. And because it was unpleasant, I irised through it really fast in a matter of seconds, and propelled myself on out into what ultimately became a sense of being at one with the universe, which was pretty great. And somewhere in the middle of that sense of nirvana, of being one with the universe, I remember thinking, shit, I've got a plane to catch. At which point my consciousness started to fall back towards my body again.
Nothing brings you back from an ego death more than
I started to remember who I was, and falling back down through it again, I came back through this hell world image, this layer that seemed to be next to the earth. And because I didn't want to come out of the trip, I slowed down there. And I remember stopping to look at the trapped souls and the burning in pain. And I remember seeing a very clear three-headed dog guarding hell, which was clearly Cerberus. There was a very convincing Cerberus, and I was looking at it thinking, my God, how is that done? Is that a hallucination? It's better than stop motion animation, but it's not VFX. And I was admiring the way that Cerberus was done, and I noticed the creature was looking sort of hurt and shrinking into itself, and I thought, oh, poor Cerberus, what's wrong? And I realized it was because I wasn't afraid of it. And I thought, okay, if I'm frightened of it, it'll grow into a huge, terrifying thing. And because I'm treating it like I'm analyzing a VFX or a stop motion model, I'm not giving it any energy, and it's shrinking and becoming more inconclusive. And I kind of came out of it, and found myself lying in the back garden in North London. And ended up back in my body again. I was catching the bus home again in an hour afterwards.
Well, yeah, I mean that's one of the craziest things about DMT is that you're just so completely lucid again within 30 minutes afterwards. You could be driving a car. It's so bizarre how you can be so far gone and then so completely sober within such a short space of time. But I must admit, when I first watched The Color Out of Space, I was having some serious DMT flashbacks watching that, because I think there's, with a lot of like cosmic horror kind of stuff, it really taps into that feeling of the psychedelic, in that it's not necessarily horror like a monster, like a malicious monster out to get you. It's just something that's just so vast and so powerful that it's not even that you're kind of insignificant before. It's just that you're nothing. It's not that it doesn't care. It just steamrolls over you. And as I watched The Color Out of Space, which I've got to say, I thought is actually one of the best horror films I have seen in a long time. I have not. I think it's been, not since I've been like a kid have I seen something which has really made me think, oh wow, that's gotten inside my head. And really a lot of that was just because of how psychedelic it was. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, is this the dice that I am rolling whenever I do something like smoke DMT? Is this the potential for me to be like, fused into my children, or like, into just completely have this thing just rewrite me into something else, where this, your identity has gone to, where you can consider, oh, have I died, or what, am I me anymore? These things are just so powerful within how they can sort of rewrite your experience, that it just kind of I thought The Color Out of Space was a really just amazing like thought experiment in like, this could go another way. These experiences, these novel experiences that I kind of seek and encourage. Then there is, I don't know if I would say it's a dark side to them, but there is a potential there, and I think there's something in us where we recognize that we recognize that there is this this Cthulhu-esque void that is possible, but we don't necessarily want to acknowledge it. So I think it's again, it's to your credit that you could be face to face with Cerberus and not be completely terrified, because I mean I think for a lot of people, they're completely freaked out at those kind of hellscape moments. But I mean, was
I think bad trips are pretty useful.
Yeah.
I mean, naturally I would, because I'm kind of the bad trip guy, but you'll get to learn a lot from them, and generally all of our fears of death and of losing our identity, and losing our consciousness, or what we think of as who we are, if that fear that it's all being stripped away from you, and the sudden desire to clutch after it and go, no, it's you. I don't want to go, and to hang on to your chair, or hang on to the rock you're sitting on is I guess what holds one back from the full experience. It really does demand that you let go of all that, and it does kind of manifest, I think, in some stage of the psychedelic experience with the sense that either you're dying or that the world is coming to an end. Those apocalyptic senses that everything's being destroyed around one, or one's own body is being destroyed, I think is a stage in the process that one reaches on in quite a few different shamanic journeys. And I think it's only when you're able to pass through that it really opens out into something else, which that does require a sort of an acceptance of the obliteration of one's consciousness and one's identity.
For sure, and I think in a lot of these cases, that's the desired thing, that you're often people are going into it because you are looking to change, you are looking to shed, your old past, or at least be open to some sort of new experience. And so I think like a part of the price that you have to sort of pay the boatkeeper there is that you have to lose the old you. If you're going to become the new you have to by default lose the old you. And I think some people don't recognize that this is what's actually the transaction that's taking place. And so when the old you starts being disintegrated, then they perceive it as pain and as an attack and something. Whereas, as you say, if you can face these things with open arms and curiosity, which is, just to be clear, is a lot easier said than done.
Absolutely. It takes, I think, years of farting around with psychedelics. I figured one of the most useful things about them, experimenting with them initially for me, was that it was, I guess, teaching me how to deal with the unknown, and gradually developing a stronger tolerance for simply allowing it to happen without resistance and without fighting it or attempting to rationalize it or put it in the box, and just accepting it, and also teaching one about how to die, how to accept one's mortality.
Which again is something that's really lacking, I think, in our culture. We're so we kind of put death into, just kick it down the line as that's something that'll happen at some point, and we're so unprepared for it. Whereas in some cultures, it's just it's one of the main aspects of life is preparing yourself for death. And I'm really fascinated by some of the traditions like the Eleusinian mysteries and stuff, where they have these rituals specifically for preparing you for that you die now through these rituals, through these kind of ego deaths, that then you will not fear death later on. And that seems like such a much more healthy system of living, rather than our current thing of kind of sedate yourself now, tranquilize yourself now, so that you don't think about it too much. And that's I think we're kind of really missing a trick in our culture by not embracing some of these shamanistic principles and some of these rituals of preparing yourself for something that comes later. But just something that you said earlier with terms of these experiences and being sort of traumatic and feeling it sort of being pulled away from you, I think some of that it ties into a lot of these kind of these traditions of or folklore stories around like shape shifting and things like that, where there is some transformation that it's kind of and it's against one's will, where being turned into something where it's no longer you. And that idea of something being no longer you, I think, is one of the kind of the terrifying aspects within these kind of these like ego death experiences, where it's the old you is being pulled away or it's being transformed into something else, and you're just not ready for it. And I just want it kind of tied back into I think some of my earliest fears. One of the things that like got me into like horror movies and stuff like that was this fear of being transformed. I used to be like I was completely drawn to things like werewolf movies, but they terrified me on some primal level because of this physically painful but mentally this mental transformation to something that was no longer you. And I think there's certainly an aspect of that in the Color Out of Space. I think with the certainly with the spoilers. If you've not seen it, pause now, anyone. But yeah, certainly with what happens to the mother and child, and certainly with the, in fact, to the whole family. There's that. I think that's the horrific element of it, is just how much it takes away their humanity on lots of different levels. And I just wanted to ask, I mean, was your own experiences with psychedelics, was that an inspiration into that film in general? I mean, I'm aware that the story is comes from real date, but just in the way it was presented.
Well, to some extent, I pretty much structure everything that I make as a kind of psychedelic experience. At least I hope to try to influence the brain chemistry or the emotions of the viewer. And I'm fairly primitive, so I generally only have these different crazy experiences to draw on. So certainly hardware is very obviously structured the same way as Color Out of Space, and that starts slow and kind of daylit, and then hardware, it's clear because Shades, the space jockey living next door, takes a tab of moonflash at one point, which he holds up to the camera, and it's fairly emphatic. There's a point where he drops the tab, and then things start to slowly come up and amp up from that point on, and then they just amp up to some kind of insane crescendo where I hope that if we can drag the audience along, that you can start to potentially feel a little woozy along the way. And in Color Out of Space, we tried to assist by pushing along with Colin Stetson, the composer, the soundtrack deliberately pushes into illegal areas of the sonic spectrum, into mostly into ultrasound and a bit of infrasound. But I was very much hoping to gradually induce a sense of, I guess, integral delirium in the audience.
I think you nailed it.
And I like to do that with everything I do. It's I guess it's coming out of music videos initially, but the documentaries work the same way. And they usually start out like you're watching a regular documentary, and it's sort of sensible, and there's a kind of a shifting of gears about halfway through usually, where they start to get a little strange. With the voodoo documentary, I think it's there's a real chance that one comes out of it feeling a little funny at the end. Color Out of Space, I think we just had more of a broader palette to work with, a little more money, and a broader audio spectrum, and we've been able to hone the experience, and I would like to keep going with that, because I do think with the way cinema is going, there's definitely scope and to I guess amp up the experience. And I do want to return to the Lovecraft pantheon and explore these Lovecraftian ultra-dimensional deities or forces in greater detail. Color Out of Space doesn't actually bring one on. We don't attempt to show a deity or to bring on Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth or Nyarlathotep, but the challenge as to how to portray a god and bring on the presence of something that inhuman and massive, and again make it work in an auditorium is something I'd love to try and rise to.
Yeah, yeah. To do Cthulhu on film, because by definition, the creature is just supposed to, drive you in. It's just be so incomprehensible that it drives you insane. So, yeah, I don't know. Are you almost like giving yourself an impossible task to try and represent that? I don't know, but I would love to see it or to experience that. And I thought
I think someone's got to do it. With the Lovecraft pantheon, there's an awful lot of circling around the material, but everyone thus far has been fairly frightened to dive into the core pantheon and actually, try and bring some of these deities on with the necessary consciousness shattering, sanity altering effect that you would expect them to have on you. That you can't reduce Cthulhu to a rubber creature. It's yeah, I think there's.
Yeah, also just the vastness of it as well, which again I thought was something that was really worked in the Colorado space, because you could have this thing as literally just be a color, and I think when I tried describing the movie to a few friends, and it just, the weirdness of the color just cannot be described almost, and the sort of and the vastness, and how it does induce this kind of this feeling of, oh my god, these people are so out of their depth, they're just completely fucked in ways that they cannot even comprehend, and it's so even just to be able to do that with a color palette, I think I absolutely nailed it. So I think if there's anybody who's up to the challenge of bringing this sort of the pantheon of Lovecraftian gods to screen, I think it would definitely be you. And I did just want to.
Well, yeah, Lovecraft's got a quality to him similar, I think, to Philip K. Dick, where if you read too much of him or you expose yourself too much to his work, he can have an effect on your consciousness. If you're sitting reading Lovecraft for a few days, it can get slippy. There have been times throughout this entire process where I've had to question whether who was really in charge. Color Out of Space really wanted to get itself made.
Yeah,
was very emphatic, and it just got itself out there, and it really was skipping a beat. It was my third and last DMT trip. I still had a teeny little bit of resin in the bottom of the pipe. When I was exiting London in 2007, I was moving all my stuff out and packing it up, and I thought, okay, I can't take this pipe with me through. And I thought, shit, there's a little bit of resin still in there. I can't waste that. I barricaded myself into my bedroom and thought I'll just smoke what's left in the pipe and let it go. And, I had a brief but intense trip where I felt I was I fell back down through my own sort of DNA, or through it was a sort of organic cellular experience. Found that I convinced myself that I was some kind of amoeba or cuttlefish, some kind of very primordial creature, very far underwater, under intense pressure, but swimming in the water and breathing the water, and able to make light with my body. I was bioluminescent. And very happy, and breathing the water, and then in this hallucinatory world, I noticed there were millions others like other glowing bioluminescent creatures like myself, and we were all drifting in some deep current very far under the ocean. And the sheer multitude of our bodies created enough light that it started to illuminate where we were on the ocean floor, and I started to see details of the sunken city, which and looked like it was almost organic. It was a city, but it was somehow crystalline, or had grown like crystal or coral. These millions of bioluminescent things, like the size of plankton, where I was one of them, were being drawn through the streets in this current, and all of us were, I think, was spawn of Cthulhu, and what we're seeing was, dread, Brilia, the sunken city of great Cthulhu, who was too vast for me to perceive in my in this primal state. But I was super happy to be there, and then so at some point coalesced back into my body, lying on my bed in London, looking around. I remember seeing my plush Cthulhu doll sitting on one of the pillows, looking at me with its beady glass eye, and I remember thinking, okay, well, who's dreaming who?
Mm.
Who's really a judge here?
Well,
There's still a sense that Cthulhu may be dreaming me.
it could be, or all this collective unconsciousness that all's kind of drifting together and merging in some kind of network of consciousness. I mean, I've had similar experiences of. I mean, one I've talked about a few times on the channel here is just being a comet, sort of like going through the sort of the universe and the galaxies, and going past Dyson spheres, and sort of just I was literally this comet. I wasn't someone spectating on it. I was it, and it was just one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life. And I just felt like it was 10,000 years long. And then at the moments when I sort of came back into my body, I was shocked. It almost felt like this was the trip, because that was such an experience that I completely inhabited, that I had no perception that I was a primate on powerful psychedelic drugs. That was, as far as I'm concerned, that happened, and it was one of the most amazing and bizarre experiences of my entire life. But it was just absolutely amazing. But again, it had this element to it, similar to what you describe of. It was completely alien experience. This was not a human being having a experience of being a comet. It was just something vast and sort of like timeless happening, and over some incomprehensible amount of time, which I think if it just was downloaded into my head now would almost like make me go mad and cower from it. So yeah, I mean, and there's something with, I think particularly with the Lovecraftian stuff, it tapped into something there that is, it feels like it's known already when you read these stories, and I think this is probably why they kind of so make people so uneasy, or so visceral, or so you have these very visceral responses to them. There's just something about it where it seems it's kind of true in some way, shape or form, or it could be true, and if it is, you don't necessarily want to acknowledge it, and that's why it goes into the horror genre. But it's I know what when you say that these things get into your head and it's who's dream who. I really think Lovecraft tapped into something primal within us there, whether it's these psychological archetypes or something that is just actually the fundamental nature of the universe. No idea, but it just feels so, I don't know, tangible in a way. But yeah,
it feels like a sort of little sort of glitch in the matrix or something. But he was obviously a deeply strange man, and he drew most of his material from his dreams. He saw most of it in his dreams. The Necronomicon he saw in a dream, with the title included, and So yeah, I don't know how much of it's coming from Lovecraft psychology or whether he was perceiving things which are on some level would seem to be true. Because one of the weirdest things about the whole Lovecraftian mythos for me is that I know it's fiction, and I know it's the work of an American horror writer, a fantasist who wrote it in the 1920s and 30s. Yet some of that stuff continues to resonate and seems more powerful than a lot of yeah, deities and forces that you know are actually a part of our cultural baggage. I don't know why that is. I keep wanting to tell myself, no, that's fiction. That can't possibly be like that. But there's elements within the Lovecraft mythos that sound almost as if Lovecraft is describing things that he simply doesn't have the vocabulary or the to be able to contain or adequately explain. I guess one of the best examples of this is this use of the term non-Euclidean. Non-Euclidean geometry of the of sunken Rillia, the city on the ocean floor. And I recall using this term non-Euclidean in a school essay, and my essay coming back with this heavily ringed in red pen, and the teacher was insistent there's no such thing. All geometry is Euclidean, but it turned out that Lovecraft was right and my
Absolutely.
teacher was wrong. That we have now fractal geometry and chaos science, and we in fact used fractals to generate the VFX on Color Out of Space. So in episodes like that, Lovecraft's fiction turned out to be more on the nose than what my certainly my English or primary school science teachers were telling me.
Well, that's just like almost a perfect example of the kind of the chaos ingressing in through perhaps like an agent like Lovecraft, who was did he comprehend what he was writing there with that particular thing, or was it somebody he'd gone and studied this and then was aware of it, or was he just like, I don't know, just acting as a vessel channeling this stuff? Because as you say, some of these things, they just seem to have embedded into culture. I mean, I think a really simple example of it is Arkham. Like Arkham, this is just used throughout the sort of like the DC mythology, and everyone understands, this is a place for like the craziest, weirdest sort of people, but they don't necessarily understand where that came from. And but there's even things like Cthulhu, like, which now I get a lot of people just interpret as tentacle monster, but yeah, they don't necessarily realize that where this comes from. So a lot of these, like, it's almost like he was just verbalizing, or through his writings, stuff that was there that people can just latch onto very, very easily. So that's what I mean with this. It's almost kind of Jungian in its the way that these are like archetypes within us waiting, and now that we've got a name for them. Oh, it's Cthulhu. This is Arkham. This is cosmic horror. These are things beyond our comprehension. The non-Euclidean stuff. And it's interesting you mentioned the non-Euclidean, because I actually have a friend who is a psychedelic researcher by profession, and one of his sort of papers that he's put out there is on non-Euclidean, the geometry that is seen within the psychedelic experience, and he's catalogued a lot of that as like non-Euclidean geometry. So yeah, if I think you could definitely throw that paper back in the face of your old teacher and demand a higher grade, I think, for that one.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time Lovecraft's describing things which are beyond the limits of not only his ability to describe, but literally beyond the limits of human perception. I mean, Color Out of Space is magenta in the movie because it's infrared and ultraviolet are the outer limits of the human spectrum. just like ultrasound and infrasound are the outer limits of the auditory spectrum, and I believe the olfactory spectrum is contained by sweet on the one side and sulfur on the other, like fire and brimstone, and with Marian apparitions, people report the smell of sanctity, the sweet smell of the sweet smell of flowers. But yes, the smell of sanctity, I guess, like the ultraviolet tinge is also to me the fingerprints of ultra-dimensional or extra interference with one's consciousness by something that one can't perceive.
I think another spectrum which came across to me from the colour outer space was the emotional spectrum, because there, again, as you mentioned, kind of pushing it into the outer bandwidths of the infrared and ultraviolet. There, I think as for most of us, the bandwidth that we're operating within our emotional spectrum is very narrow on a day-to-day basis, and there you had these characters just pushed to these, on the one hand you had the sort of the mother figure pushed into God knows what part of the spectrum was going on there, and then on the other hand the father figure who's been sort of almost completely disassociated from what's going on. And so, and I think, and again, this is something that I think is completely terrifying to a lot of people. This, because we tend to sort of think of our emotions as something being very, that we're in control of, and the loss of them, I think this is another symptom of our times, that people don't know how to handle things like grief or heartbreak particularly anymore. We kind of sedate ourselves out of a lot of these perfectly natural feelings. So then when the horror overload of these feelings happens, and it's even more horrifying. And I thought that was one of the most disturbing elements of that film. So I think the pushing the bandwidth was just happening all across that movie, and it was glorious. It was, I think that's why I say it's one of my favorite horror films of recent times. It was. I think you at least with myself, you definitely got the result you're looking for.
All music to my ears, sir.
I did just want to pick your brains a little bit on just one sort of aspect, and which was certainly with when you were doing hardware, and I think one of the things that was coming across there was, and this was a kind of like the sign of the times, was the appearance of these AI as a killer robot, and very much in that sort of 1990s time. This was the sort of the cultural fear that was going on of technology as a thing that could physically attack us. Saw this like the Terminator and sort of a lot of the kind of the sci-fi movies at that time. But now the sort of the technology is not really physical and metallic. It's much more software based. It is happening as this kind of unseen, all powerful, omnipotent sort of thing. So it's, and the kind of the threat there, or certainly what I've been sort of picking up on, is that this thing is not necessarily this thing of our own creation, which again is part of the whole thing of that we create these things and then it goes and does something unpredictable, but that it's not going to physically attack us, but it will almost cause this kind of identity disintegration. So we have these things of these I don't know how much you follow these kind of strands of news, but things of these AI programs that being able to generate art forms and sort of taking art away from the artists, and you've got sort of these AIs that are able to generate computer code and are sort of taking people who were like programmers are now sort of losing out to these machines. So now it kind of like leaves to think, well, what as these things become better at what they do, which they kind of inevitably will, what are we going to be left with as human beings and all?
And I was just wondering, there's a certain like apocalyptic sort of vibe to that, which I thought you might have some insights on. I mean, is this something you think about much, or do you still sort of have your eye on that kind of like technology like you did when you were doing sort of hardware and that sort of sci-fi aspect of it, or is it something?
Yeah, I'm still tracking it, and I don't think Mark 13 the Mark 13 cyborg is no longer a threat. It's just developing on a parallel beam. But yeah, I still think we're going to have robots. We're going to have. I think AI is probably going to progress to the point that we'll have. I guess robots capable of being pets to elderly people and things, probably by 2050. And we've already got robot dogs and deployed in inside the United States, and I think weaponized drone soldiers are still only a matter of time. I think the thing to be more concerned about with the drones is really that their technology is mostly an extension of human will. I would be more concerned by how those things are used by the state and by human will before fearing a Skynet type takeover by an AI, an organized AI intelligence. And I guess I'm mostly concerned by the way that so much of it aids and abets a progression towards what a sort of authoritarian total surveillance state, what Philip K. Dick called the black iron prison of the future. A world in which all of us are tracked by, I guess it's going to be smartphones for the time being. That everyone's going to have a smartphone, because you can't go on public transport or have access to your bank account unless you have one. And a smartphone will automatically track everyone. The will to reduce that smartphone to a chip and to chip everyone is going to take longer. And people will resist. And whether everyone will end up being neurolinked, I doubt it. I think people will resist that happening, and it's also I don't think that the powers that be would like to over-empower people. So I've got a feeling that it would be strictly controlled. But I'm more afraid of the technology being used by an authoritarian human state than by an AI intelligence. And so I don't think that the droids are going to turn on their human masters and exterminate us, James Cameron style, just yet.
Yeah.
But I would like to do another hardware type movie, or if not a direct sequel, just because I would like to see how this technology is going to be used by humans in the future.
Yeah, I could see it much more as a kind of, as I say, it's just really stripping out, all of the things that we think we are good at. These machines, we say machines because it makes it sound like we're still talking about like a physical box, but we're not talking about that anymore. We're talking, a lot of these things, these kind of these algorithms, and I think that was actually something that you a bit of a profit for within hardware, because there is a moment of within that movie where you see the kind of the robot's operating system, and as you mentioned, it is this Mandelbrot fractals and all this non-Euclidean geometry, and God only knows what the actual workings of these AIs are like. What is happening, and it only will take some kind of freak, combination of some chord stacks as they merge together, and then this thing just blossoms into some kind of new thing. So I think the possibility of these things happening completely by accident, I think, is very valid. And I get the impression I work in IT myself, and I've got a lot of friends who work in these kind of AI circles, and they're all sort of like treating this thing like some kind of novel toy. And then when you see these announcements of, oh, look at this AI artwork, this AI, we showed it these pictures, and now it can draw anything, or now it can play chess, or now it can do whatever, and all it's done is learn the rules, and now it does it better than any human ever will. And then I've also got friends who are artists who have been they may no longer have a job, because why would you go to an artist to generate your concept art or your storyboards for your movie when you can just say to this AI, do that for me, and it will do it instantly in 40 different ways. And I've heard of these AIs replacing doctors, and why would you go to a doctor and ask them to diagnose you when you could give you symptoms to one of these systems which will just diagnose you so much better? So I think what's going to happen, with what you're saying around how these things might get used by the bigger state, I think that might be how they appear. But I think these things will rapidly supersede almost anybody, and we'll just end up in some kind of really weird dystopia where the big state is actually the system itself, without there having to be any war against the robots or takeover or anything, because we've kind of just will lead ourselves into it, which is kind of terrifying, I think. But I think when I see what's happening, and you've got a problem with your, with anything in your life, and you phone up some call center, and 9 times out of 10 you will be talking to a robot, or you go on a website, you'll be talking to a robot. And I think more and more of these interactions will become, you'll be dealing with these artificial intelligences, and then that kind of leads us, what will we do? We'll just become pets in the zoo at that point. So it's like I said, that's the sort of thing that keeps me awake at night. Like, what am I if I can't do these things? What value do I have as a human being? It's and who knows, maybe that'll just free us up to just sit around and take lots of psychedelics at that point.
Yeah, and I guess it all depends on what it is that creates consciousness. I mean, the moment all the AIs we got are thinking in a very linear, machine-like way, and I guess the point of the Mandelbrot set was to imply that if things started thinking fractally, then you'd start to get something resembling an actual consciousness.
Maybe that's a part. I mean, when you talk about your own experience with as being the sort of the luminescent sort of fish creature, I mean, I think it's, most people would accept that we kind of evolved from some sort of simple organisms up to the state that we are now, and that will continue till some point. Perhaps we'll evolve further, and perhaps we'll be destroyed and wiped out. But yeah, you're sort of this kind of entire ancestral heritage thing, from the first cell that you were up until what you ever might possibly be. This is some kind of Mandelbrot-esque, ever cascading loop in on itself. And yeah, if the machine could achieve something like that with its own code, yeah, is that not consciousness then? Is it? Is that all that we are? It's. I think you get into some real existential crisis stuff with this. So yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and I guess it all comes down to what it is that that makes us human. How is a soul created? If a soul exists, and how does it grow? Yeah, everyone's got a different take on it. It's difficult to know. I mean, when do animals become humans? Stanley Kubrick has the monoliths show up, and the apes touch the monolith and learn how to use tools. But in real life, apes use tools, and chimpanzees use sticks to get into anthills and things. So other anthropologists think that maybe it wasn't picking up the stick; maybe it was throwing it and judging distance, and that started to develop our consciousness beyond an edible state. But then there's other folk who say no, it was the use of entheogens, the use of taking psychedelics and plants that really jarred hominids into developing into human beings. And so what process an AI, a machine intelligence, would have to go through? It's not like the unfortunate AI has access to an entheogen.
Or maybe it could generate its own entheogen. Maybe that would be part of its kind of Mandelbrot set. Just because I've also heard people talking along those lines of that if we ever did end up in some sort of Neuralinky kind of world, which I think is quite far off, but certainly not impossible, then you would be able to have programmed experiences. If you've got something which can trigger the various synapses of your brain, then that would then be that's being controlled by some sort of brain interface, then you could have a programmed experience. And so then
if we were able to record an experience as we possibly could, and then replay that perception through the wetware of your body, using you as the recorder, you would be experiencing that recorded experience.
Yeah, and then that gets even further into like then who am I then? Which experiences am I actually happening? I mean, perhaps that is what something like DMT is, in that we're dealing with a sort of a medium of transmission of experiences. So you had your experiences of the kind of the Cthulhu bioluminescent dimension, and I think for anyone who's had these experiences will know they feel so fully real and fully formed. It doesn't seem like some sort of random brain fart. It actually feels like a full download of something. So I mean, maybe
usually if it's really hitting it right, it usually feels like that's the true reality. That the rest of your life is the flimsy illusion. The reality is that you've always been some kind of protoplasmic being living at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, which is just fine.
Yeah, so sort of protoplasmic being that had a dream that it was some kind of monkey at some point. It's So I mean, if you could then, perhaps DMT or any of these substances is a sort of biochemical delivery system for transmitting novelty or transmitting new ideas. So could a machine have a similar thing? There are theories saying that consciousness is just a byproduct of data processing. So as you say, you throw the stick, you see how far it went, you process that data, and then things start emerging out, and suddenly you're thinking, what am I? Am I a being? So if that's the case, if it's just an emergent property of data processing, then why couldn't it emerge out of a thinking program? It's So I mean, if you did ever get around to making hardware too, I think there's a lot of different avenues you could go down with that, and I'd absolutely I'd be one of the.
I just haven't really seen a droid movie lately that's really explored where what I think is likely to probably happen with droids, at least in the next 30 years or so.
I think
we're way too hung up on droids going out of control and becoming a hazard and running amok.
And
I definitely want to see an android movie where the android doesn't run amok and functions as it's supposed to, and try and explore the moral dilemmas that are inevitably going to the moral and philosophical dilemmas that are going to inevitably arise from that.
I thought that was one aspect where the Matrix movies did quite a good job of it, because it's not really that the androids have run amok. It's more that the androids were kind of like perfect and sort of normal, but it's like humans treated them shittily. Humans began to sort of fear and treat badly, not respect what they had created, and so then the the robots had no choice but to rebel. So I thought that was quite a good take on it. Probably the last most interesting take on the sort of how technology might sort of turn against us. Because and I think from most perspectives of that movie, it's the technology, the robots, the Matrix are actually not particularly in the wrong there. As they kind of mentioned in the movie, it's humans who darkened the skies and forced the androids to sort of make batteries out of people, and even then they kept them alive and gave them this simulation stuff. So yeah, I think for the next really good take on technology, it would have to be something different than just something that's a killer thing. I'd really want to see something that like explores just these kind of ever changing boundaries of what technology is and how it might, fuse with us and take over some of these what we consider as human. I think that was another good aspect of Hardware, is that the robot was doing a lot of like religious symbolism itself. It was like it was first of all, it was delivering these experiences by injecting people with these psychedelic drugs, but also it had a lot of the sort of the Christ-like imagery to it, and so again it was similar to Color Out of Space. It worked across like a lot of the fringes of like, okay, this is not your average just killer robot. There's a lot going on there. So I think that's one of the reasons that movie landed so much with my generation.
Yeah, and I think it must have been probably one of the first movies to land of your generation that was made by your generation, because the average age on Hardware was very young. Chris Cunningham, who went on to direct the Apex Twins videos, was our principal gore boy on Hardware, and I remember Chris turned 16
Really?
on the shoot, so he was 15 for the first part of the shoot, and the very crude wireframe animation in Hardware was done on a school computer somewhere. The first assistant AD was the oldest person on the set. So Hardware was presumably a Gen X droid movie, as opposed to the other ones in the video bin at the time. I mean, in Hardware's gestation, the killer android was a late addition to the movie, because I pushed around a version of Hardware which didn't have the killer android in it for a bunch of years, which was more like I guess closer to Make Room, the Harry Harrison novel that inspired Soylent Green, or Fat City in the mid 21st century. It was a super depressing piece set over Christmas in Mo and Jill's apartment with the tripping space jockey neighbor next door and the fat asshole block surveillance man. And after failing to get it made for years and years and years, Alien and Terminator were a thing, and the video boxes were overflowing with Alien and Terminator knockoffs, where different people stalked barely seen monsters around darkened warehouses, which was all the rage back then. And everyone insisted if only you could put a killer alien or a killer android into the story, you would be fine. So I eventually did that and hunkered down and dropped a killer cyborg into the movie just to get the thing made, which worked, and it got made, and the circumstances were such that it only got made after a couple of years after writing it, and the script went out of my hands and floated around from one set of hands to another. So I'd completely abandoned any expectation that the movie would ever actually happen, and it managed to get set up simultaneous to the events in Afghanistan. So I was relatively unaware of it. I was too busy trying to tripping off my face and trying to get out of the country to know what was going on back in London. It only connected to me when I finally got a phone call from him, and literally rolled back from that experience straight into pre-production into shooting the movie. So I guess the other thing that makes Hardware strange is it was I was in a very strange state of mind at the time when I landed into it. It's kind of what I had instead of therapy.
I think that definitely comes across in it. It is. I mean, I think the fact that it was kind of marketed as this, killer robot sort of, if you like Terminator, you'll like this. I think completely doesn't do it justice at all. And I think this is one of the reasons why it did land so big with sort of the counterculture of my generation, because it was just that almost like the herald of this influx of just super weird but super on the nose amount of media that was coming in. We had things like Hardware, bands like Ministry and Nine Inch Nails fusing these kind of very techno-y stuff with sort of like classical sort of rock stuff. All this weird stuff coming over from Japan, like all the anime stuff of Akira and Tetsuo, or the Iron Man and stuff like that. So it was all landing at this time, and it was just, it was just such a glorious time to be.
Yeah, it was a very interesting moment. It was the end of the 80s and 1990 landed.
Absolutely, and it was and just all this stuff with just featuring all these just transformations of mind, of body, of what it means to be a human being. I think it really kicked off that kind of like transhuman part of the culture, and I think Hardware was definitely a part of that. And yeah, it was just I had no idea that Chris Cunningham was involved in that, and I think what a crazy juxtaposition from being like working on Hardware one moment to I think the video pops into my mind of his All Is Full of Love, where he did the video of the robots making love to each other, which is it's one of the most beautiful sort of videos ever, but it's completely at odds with the kind of the killer robots trying to murder people in the sleep. So yeah,
well, that wasn't his fault. That was my crazy script. It's the sign of Chris's genius that at the point when I got him, when he like I say, he had his 16th birthday on the shoot. I was getting him off the back of Hellraiser and Nightbreed. He'd already been doing appliances on Hellraiser at that point. So he came off Hardware onto Stanley Kubrick's AI, which didn't get made. But his next gig after Hardware was to try and build the robot for AI, which wasn't going to be Haley Joel Osment at that point. It was a full-on animatronic, and Chris spent about a year in a warehouse building it over and over again for crazy Mr. Kubrick, who was never satisfied.
Oh my God. So I think it probably, I'm pretty sure it's up to like the 2 hour mark, so I think it's probably a good place to wrap it up. But is it sort of too much? Like, I mean, what are you currently working on something? Because I had heard some, and I think you mentioned earlier that you were planning on revisiting the Lovecraftian world. So maybe it's like as a closer, like, is it what would be your next kind of project coming up?
Well, yeah, always open to all possibilities, but what I'm driving towards is the return of the old ones, and I feel that the Lovecraft mythos' time has come, and the sheer fact that it touches on so many hot-button political issues at the moment as well is another reason why I want to stay with the Lovecraft mythos. I feel an obligation to defend Lovecraft's work for a number of reasons. I'd like to very much like to mount an adaptation of the Dunwich horror. I've been trying to do Dunwich for years and years and years. In fact, I was trying to do Dunwich before Color Out of Space, and at that point in time, all kinds of weird presses ended up with me directing Color Out of Space instead. But do want to give Wilbur Whateley or Wilbur Whatley his moment, and to bring on Yog-Sothoth and the Necronomicon. One of the things that needs to be addressed in the next movie is the issue of Lovecraft's conscience and the human element. And I think the positioning of the Whately family in Dunwich, who are basically poor white trash whose ancestors were driven out of Europe after being persecuted by the witch hunters, and who have been persecuted in Salem and have fled inland to like the vicinity of Athol, Massachusetts, and who have been working tirelessly to try and open the gates to the old ones and bring about this apocalyptic demise of the human race. And generation after generation, they've blown it, because they've got the Whateleys have a history of ghastly failure and everything that they attempt to do. So. And the eventual confrontation, where it's Wilbur's destiny to take his granddaddy's Civil War era Colt 45 and go on campus and demand that they hand back the Necronomicon, and the realization by the liberal academics that the Whateleys have to be stopped. Have to be exterminated is an issue that really needs to be examined, because I'm tired of Lovecraft being designated as a racist or a crypto-fascist. I think the man had a heart and a social conscience, and I would like to explore those themes, as well as have the opportunity to bring on Yog-Sothoth.
Excellent. Well, I can only say that I hope you get a chance to make that, and if you do, I will be certainly one of the first in line to watch it. So I just want to say,
I think if I can state that ambition more clearly, I'd like to stream Yog-Sothoth into people's lounges, and into as many lounges across this world as possible. If I've got a New Year's wish.
Maybe that's what it's been wanting for. That's it's been biding its time, waiting for the technology to be the capability that, like, we as humans, we didn't realize what we were opening ourselves up to with these little portals, and then before we know it, the old ones just there. Every teenager's mind, every child's mind will pay the price for our sort of selling our souls to these devices. So
let's see what happens.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, no, I was going to say thank you so much for your time, Richard. I've had an absolute blast talking to you and picking your brain on these things, and you've been very, very, it's so, like I said, I think some of your experiences that you had sound absolutely incredible. And I mean, if you're up for it, I would love to talk to you again at some point in the future. But for now, I will close this one up. So thank you very much, Richard.
Oh, good stuff, sir. It's been an honor and a privilege, and a pleasure to tell a few weird anecdotes.